Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're taking a deep dive into Ian W. Toll's Twilight of the Gods, War in the Western Pacific, 1944-1945. Now this is the final, really gripping volume of Toll's acclaimed Pacific War Trilogy. It covers that intense, brutal, and ultimately decisive final year of the conflict. We're talking mid-1944, right up to Japan's surrender in August 45. Our mission today really is to pull out the most important insights, maybe some surprising facts, and those deeply human stories from this incredibly detailed history. We want to help you get a quick handle on the key dynamics of this pivotal year, basically giving you a shortcut to being really well informed about how the Pacific War ended.
Yeah, it's an absolutely monumental piece of work. And what's so great about Toll's approach is how he unpacks this multi-layered story. We're not just looking at, troop movements and battles. We're digging into the high-level strategy debates between leaders like, FDR, MacArthur, Nimitz. We'll also explore the amazing evolution of naval and air power, some new tactics, and, the often brutal realities of the island-hopping campaigns and the firebombing of cities. Plus, you get these stark contrasts between the American and Japanese home fronts. Toll really delves into the psychological toll, too, on soldiers and civilians, and, of course, the internal struggles within Japan's leadership as defeat looked more and more certain. Then there's the dramatic, world-changing climax with the atomic bombs, and finally we'll touch on the complex aftermath, the surrender, and that immediate post-war period.
Okay, so let's unpack this critical year then. We kick things off in mid-1944, a real period of strategic crossroads. You've got the Honolulu Strategy Conference in July '44, huge moment. FDR, MacArthur, Nimitz, all there planning the war's final phase. And what Toll brings out, which I found fascinating, is just how much personal ambition and, frankly, political maneuvering played into these massive military decisions.
Oh, absolutely. Toll uses some newer sources, like the diary of Robert C. Richardson Jr. He was the Army commander in Hawaii who hosted MacArthur, and it really shows the intensity of the debate. MacArthur was pushing hard for recapturing the Philippines, Luzon specifically, and it wasn't just strategy, was it? It was deeply personal, that "I shall return" promise. He even talks about his first marriage failing, saying his current wife and little boy were all he had left. It's kind of striking how he wove his personal story into his strategic argument.
Right. And then on the other side, you had the Joint Chiefs, the JCS, and particularly Admiral King. They wanted a more direct route, Central Pacific towards Formosa. That was Operation Causeway. And King, well, he didn't pull any punches, did he? Toll says he basically questioned MacArthur's competence, even suggesting MacArthur cared more about his promise than winning the war. This wasn't just a disagreement over maps. It was a real clash of egos, big personalities involved.
Exactly. And all this high-stakes decision-making is happening against this backdrop of, complex media relations and information control. Toll points out FDR's deep dislike for certain newspapers, the Hearst McCormick Patterson chain, which were constantly attacking him. And initially, FDR and his advisors hadn't really thought much about war reporting or censorship. There's that famous offhand remark from FDR about journalists getting damn little news.
That's amazing. It shows how, political feelings could accidentally shoot how information got out during the war. And the poor war correspondents were kind of stuck in the middle. They had incredible restrictions, couldn't reveal sailing dates, destinations, even to their editors back home. They had officers' privileges, but no actual rank, leading to these awkward moments being saluted and feeling they had to salute back in their khakis. The military, as Toll details, was pretty heavy-handed with censorship at first. Junior officers, scared of getting chewed out, just withheld stuff. David Brinkley summed it up, didn't he? Said the military felt they owned the news.
Yeah, it was this constant back and forth. You even had cases like the Chicago Tribune printing stuff about secret code-breaking programs. Now, the Navy later figured Japan hadn't cottoned on, but still, it shows that tightrope walk between getting the news out and keeping secrets safe. But despite all these internal frictions, American naval innovation was just relentlessly moving forward.
And this is where it gets really cool, right? The development of underway replenishment. This wasn't just pump and fuel. It was a whole mobile supply chain, ammo, spare parts, even fresh food, all delivered at sea. It let the fleet stay out for months. Absolutely revolutionized naval warfare. Task Force 58 could roam across this huge, 5,000-mile front. Unbelievable tactical mobility, sustained operations like never before.
Totally transformed the Pacific. And then there's this other layer of cleverness, rotating Halsey and Spruance every 5 or 6 months. So the 5th Fleet would become the 3rd Fleet, Task Force 58 became Task Force 38. It was a trick, basically, to confuse the Japanese about fleet strength and location, and it worked, at least for a while. Japanese radio would mention both fleets. Now, Admiral Spruance, often seen as this hard-driving workaholic, but his chief of staff apparently said he was the laziest man you've ever seen. He was more like a professional gambler, Toll says. Calculated risks, avoided unnecessary danger, always focused on protecting the beachheads. That careful approach led to the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot in June 44. Just decimated Japanese air power, over 300 planes down in one day.
And then you had the complete opposite in Admiral Halsey, the Bull. Big personality, swaggering, reporters loved him, always ready with a quote. His famous line was, "The way to win this war is to kill Japs, and kill more Japs." Toll really shows how these two very different guys, Spruance the calculator and Halsey the aggressor, both played crucial roles.
Right. So as we move into late 1944, the sheer brutality of the war just ramps up. Peleliu, September to November. It became infamous. Marines called it the worst battle. You got to picture it. Over 105 degrees, this fine coral dust everywhere, the constant stench of death, men suffering from constant concussions. And the commander, Major General Rupertus, he'd initially called it a quickie, maybe 4 days, 5 days at most.
Yeah, tragically wrong. What Toll described so vividly is the Japanese defense under Lieutenant General Kuribayashi. This incredible honeycomb system, tunnels, caves, interconnected bunkers, every ridge, every coral outcrop turned into a fortified position. It just grounds the Americans down. Seabees were working under fire constantly, filling in craters on the runways just as new ones appeared. Nightmare stuff.
And the human cost was just immense. It pushed men right to the edge. Guys like Gene Sledge and Sterling Mays talked about the first Marines becoming these emaciated figures, eyes glazed and distant. Just shows the psychological damage. And Toll doesn't sugarcoat the atrocities either. Some Japanese soldiers mutilating bodies, and on the American side, some guys harvesting gold teeth. It highlights that descent into savagery that can happen. What's also interesting is that Peleliu barely registered back home. It was overshadowed by Europe, by MacArthur and the Philippines. Shows that disconnect between the front line and the home front.
Then came Leyte Gulf, October 44. A truly massive naval battle. Japan's plan show was basically a naval banzai charge, right? A desperate final gamble. Throw everything they had left into one big fight. Admiral Kurita even asked, would it not be shameful to have the fleet remain intact while our nation perishes? Yeah. Those giant battleships, Yamato and Musashi, the Hotel Yamato and Hotel Musashi, because they had seen so little action, they were finally going in. Says a lot about how desperate things were for Japan.
And this battle marks the formal start of organized kamikaze attacks. Toll digs into the controversy around this, even within the Japanese military. Some saw it as this sort of death cult, a distortion of Bushido. The focus shifted massively to spiritual will rather than actual piloting skill. Very little training for these pilots. Japan's big idea was to show their Yamato spirit in full force, hoping to make the Americans, flinch, maybe reconsider. The battle itself was just epic. Halsey's famous strike, repeat, strike, good luck, order. The carrier Princeton took a kamikaze hit, huge explosion, hundreds of bombs went off, and the Musashi, that huge battleship, finally sunk by U.S. carrier planes after taking incredible punishment.
But the moment everyone remembers, especially military buffs, is that message from Nimitz to Halsey. Where is Task Force 34? The world wonders. Ouch. A really public, humiliating slapdown. Nimitz was clearly furious that Halsey had chased Ozawa's carriers north, leaving Leyte Gulf wide open. It's a classic case study in how one commander's decision can just completely change a battle's outcome.
Absolutely. It left Kinkaid's landing forces dangerously exposed to Kurita's fleet. And Kurita, he had victory right there, Leyte Gulf, basically undefended. But he controversially turned back. Toll explores the reasons, maybe confusion, fear of a phantom U.S. carrier force, exhaustion. It's one of those historical moments people still argue fiercely about. Meanwhile, up in the air, the B-29 Superfortress program was hitting major snags. The Battle of Kansas was about fixing hundreds of issues with these new bombers and flying them from the Marianas, places like Saipan. Logistical nightmare. General Hansel got there and found, quote, a miserable shambles, unpaved runways, tents, so those initial high-altitude daylight precision bombing missions. Lots of problems, high abort rates. It took time to get it right.
So we roll into 1945. The endgame is starting, but the fighting gets even worse somehow, and the home fronts are dealing with totally different realities. In the U.S., yeah, there was maybe an over-the-hump feeling after FDR won re-election of 44. But Secretary Stimson was warning, don't relax yet, pointing to manpower shortages. And Toll highlights something important. Even in America, racial tensions were high. You had riots like the Zoot Suit riots in L.A., trouble in Detroit. But at the same time, the war was kind of fueling the early civil rights movement, creating economic opportunities for African Americans and changing expectations.
And then you look at Japan. Just a stark contrast. Food shortages were severe. People looked emaciated. Finding food was the main daily struggle. And this horrifying detail, 350,000 kids evacuated from cities, packed into dorms, and then systematically indoctrinated, practicing with bamboo spears, chanting, "Annihilate America" in England. It's chilling. Shows the extremes of total war.
January 45, MacArthur makes his big return to the Philippines. Leyte Gulf. Initial landings, relatively easy. Filipino civilians are ecstatic. And MacArthur, of course, stages his famous wading ashore photo op. But then the reality hits. Huge logistical problems, destroyed bridges, tough terrain, and Toll describes MacArthur getting impatient, wanting to push straight for Manila, worried about POWs and civilian internees. He overrides General Kruger's concerns about supply lines being stretched too thin.
And that impatience tragically runs right into the horror of the Manila Massacre.
Yeah.
The Japanese forces there, under Rear Admiral Iwabuchi, basically ignored orders to evacuate and unleash just sickening brutality on the civilians. Gang rapes, torture, mass killings with bayonets, burning people alive. Toll calls it an exposure of the worst pathologies of Japan's military culture. Just absolutely nightmarish accounts. Headless bodies on lampposts. Awful.
And the American response, well, it involved devastating artillery barrages on Manila. Toll mentions the most concentrated artillery barrage yet seen in the Pacific War, hitting Intramuros, the old walled city, reduced it to a gigantic burned-out scar. MacArthur's return to his ruined pre-war home at the Manila Hotel is a really poignant moment, Toll captures. Later, MacArthur condemns the Japanese for the unnecessarily destroyed city, shows the terrible cost of urban warfare.
Then we shift to Iwo Jima, March 45. Lieutenant General Kurebayashi is in command, orders his men, defend it to the last man. And he uses those incredible underground honeycomb fortifications again. Caves, tunnels, designed to survive massive bombing. Every position was a potential death trap. Brutal, brutal fighting. Constant noise, constant death. But it also produced probably the most famous image of the entire war.
The flag raising in Mount Suribachi.
Yeah.
Iconic. Secretary of the Navy Forstall saw it and said, the raising of that flag on Suribachi means a Marine Corps for the next 500 years. Captures the heroism, but behind the image was just hell on earth. Toll emphasizes the incredible bravery of the medical corpsmen, constantly under fire, giving morphine, plasma, trying to save lives.
Right, and as the end approaches, General Curtis LeMay makes a major shift in strategy for the B-29s, low-altitude incendiary bombing of Japanese cities. The justification was partly military, hitting those small feeder workshops in residential areas, but also, frankly, a response to Japanese atrocities like Manila. The Tokyo firebombing raid on March 10, 1945. It's horrific to read about. M69 incendiaries, a strong wind, created literal firestorms. Walls of fire, canals boiling. Firefighters were totally overwhelmed, absolutely helpless, caused this massive exodus from the city, unbelievable destruction.
Next up, Okinawa. Operation Iceberg. Admiral Struentz is back in command. Starts with the dangerous job of minesweeping. Toll mentions the destroyer Halligan just vanishing in a huge explosion. Shows how risky even the approach was. Lieutenant General Ushijima, commanding the Japanese defense, had a specific plan. Don't fight hard on the beaches. Draw the Americans inland. Pull them into this massive interconnected defense system built around Shuri Castle. Deep tunnels, fortifications. The goal was to drag it out, inflict maximum casualties.
And the Japanese response from the air? The Kikusue, or floating chrysanthemums, massed kamikaze attacks. Toll describes them as swarming, almost overpowering. They caused huge damage to the U.S. fleet, immense psychological strain, especially on the guys out on the radar picket ships, the first line of defense. And then there was the final suicidal mission of the super battleship Yamato, part of Operation Tengo, a symbol of desperation, really. It was overwhelmed by U.S. carrier planes, a dramatic, fiery end.
The Okinawan civilians suffered terribly, caught right in the middle. Often kicked out of caves by the Japanese army, huge casualties, some horrific stories of desperation. But Toll also knows instances where American soldiers and Marines did take risks to try and save civilians, which is important to remember too. And right in the middle of all this, April 12, 1945, news arrives. President Roosevelt is dead. Servicemen were apparently curious and a bit apprehensive about Truman. Would he prolong the war? Nobody really knew him.
Yeah, and back on Okinawa, conditions in the Japanese command bunker were deteriorating badly. Flooding, constant shelling. Ushijima's last orders were just to keep fighting, keep buying time for the defense of the homeland. A fight to the bitter end.
Which brings us to August 1945, the inevitable conclusion. And of course, the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project, top secret. Truman himself, Toll notes, had very limited knowledge before becoming president. Initially puzzled by talk of this incredibly powerful new weapon,
The Trinity test in New Mexico must have been staggering. Observers talking about 2 sunrises, completely unprecedented power unleashed. The interim committee decided pretty quickly. Direct military use against Japan. They rejected doing a demonstration, thinking it wouldn't be enough to force a surrender. Then came the Potsdam Declaration demanding surrender, and Japan's response, mokusatsu. Ambiguous. Could mean ignore it, could mean no comment yet. Truman took it as go to hell, a critical, possibly tragic moment of interpretation.
August 6, 1945. The Enola Gay drops the bomb on Hiroshima. Immediate, total devastation. Colonel Tibbets, piloting the plane, saw a black, boiling nest from the air. Father Seams, a Jesuit priest on the ground, described this gigantic burned-out scar walking through thousands of horribly wounded people. Truman announced it triumphantly from the USS Augusta, talking about harnessing the basic power of the universe. Then, just 3 days later, August 9th, another huge blow for Japan. The Soviet Union declares war and invades Manchuria.
And that same day, August 9th, the Boxcar drops the second bomb on Nagasaki. That mission itself was full of problems. Toll details the snafus and mishaps. Technical issues, bad weather, almost didn't happen. Back in Tokyo, things were absolutely explosive politically. A coup attempt by younger officers trying to stop the surrender talks, even as the emperor was leaning towards peace.
But Emperor Hirohito made his move. That unprecedented radio broadcast on August 15th, his jeweled sound, as it was called, announcing surrender, caused mass confusion in Japan, breakdown of discipline, some officers committed suicide, just utter shock. Meanwhile, in the U.S., wild celebrations, VJ Day, riotous parties, the famous Times Square kiss picture, veterans getting mobbed with cheers and kisses, total contrast.
The American occupation of Japan then began quite methodically. MacArthur's arrival at Atsugi Airfield was pure theater, flying over the ruins of Yokohama and Tokyo Bay. The formal surrender ceremony on the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, very solemn. Allied leaders all there. Toll paints this picture of Foreign Minister Shigemitsu, who'd lost a leg years before, struggling up the gangway. Watched, Toll says, with savage satisfaction by some onlookers. A difficult moment.
In the immediate aftermath wasn't simple. Challenges popped up fast. Toll mentions corruption among some U.S. military personnel involved in the occupation, taking bribes. Demobilization was tough for many returning vets, a sense of alienation, disillusionment after everything they'd seen. But the war also had these huge transformative effects back home. Big changes for American women, their roles, their expectations, helped fuel second-wave feminism later. And it really spurred the civil rights movement. Economic opportunities during the war led to migration, changed perspectives, raised expectations for African Americans.
Yeah, and Toll concludes by looking at how MacArthur's policies during the occupation kind of reinforced this collective amnesia in Japan about the war, especially with the chrysanthemum taboo, not criticizing the emperor. It really shaped Japan's post-war identity. So looking back at this final year through Twilight of the Gods, you just see the immense human cost, the incredible complexity of strategy, technology, individual choices, all converging in this incredibly dramatic end.
So it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Given the scale of suffering, the technological leaps we saw, what does victory actually mean when you look at it through all those individual experiences and unintended changes? And how do we square those grand historical narratives with the countless personal stories, the ripple effects that spread out long after the fighting stops? Something to definitely ponder.